The hospice admission form clearly stated no known family, but the nurse recognized the frail man's name from a local news article years before. He was a respected community patriarch with two daughters. When she quietly asked him if he wanted to see them, his eyes, clouded by medication but sharp with desperation, locked onto hers. That single, silent yes triggered a phone call. And that call unraveled a son-in-law's plan to control every medical decision and every last dollar as this man lay dying. This is the story of Charles Whitmore, a once vital 70-year-old building contractor who entered hospice care under the sole control of his daughter's husband. The official story was simple: a dying man with no other family. But that story was a lie designed to grant one man total power over another man's final days and his entire estate. When hospice nurse Lauren Gibbs saw the fear in Charles's eyes, she faced a choice: follow the paperwork or follow her conscience. Her decision to dial a single forgotten number would expose a scheme built on isolation and ignite a legal war fought at a dying man's bedside. For 40 years, Charles Whitmore wasn't a man you could easily ignore. He built Whitmore & Sons Construction from a single truck into a respected firm with 30 employees, known for quality and his word as his bond. His wife, Helen, passed away from breast cancer a decade ago, a loss that left him quietly devastated but determined to be the rock for his two girls. Eleanor, the eldest, was her mother's spitting image, strong-willed, independent, a journalist who'd moved across the country. Marie, the younger, was softer, more eager to please, and by 28 she had married David Mercer. David presented himself as a financial planner, a stable counterpart to Marie's artistic temperament. He was always there, offering to help Charles with modernizing his business finances, making suggestions about investments, estate planning. At first, it seemed like earnest help. Then 3 years ago, Charles was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The treatments were brutal. David's involvement became constant. He drove Charles to appointments, spoke to doctors, framed it all as taking stress off Marie. The real shift happened after a major surgery. Weakened and on heavy pain medication, Charles was recovering at home when David presented a document, a durable power of attorney for healthcare and finances. "Just a precaution, Charles," David had said, his tone soothing. "If you're incapacitated briefly, someone needs to keep the business payroll running, pay your medical bills. It's for Marie's peace of mind." In a fog of pain and trust, Charles signed. With that signature, David's strategy accelerated. He began suggesting Charles was too confused by painkillers to make sound business decisions, slowly edging long-time office managers out of the financial loop. He argued that the large, empty family home was too much for Charles to manage, pressing him to move into a cozy, manageable guest house on Marie and David's property. Isolated from his own surroundings and routine, Charles's world shrank. Then David started controlling the narrative about family. When Eleanor would call, David would answer. "He's sleeping, the pain is really bad today, maybe call tomorrow." The tomorrow stacked up. To Eleanor, it began to feel deliberate. She booked a flight home, but David called her the night before, his voice thick with grave concern. "The doctor says any stress could be catastrophic. Your presence, the emotional upheaval, I can't allow it. You'll have to trust I have his best interests at heart." He positioned himself as the sole protector. 6 months ago, with Charles's health declining further, David made the decision to transition to hospice care. He told the coordinating nurse that Charles had only one immediate family, his daughter Marie, and that the other daughter, Eleanor, was estranged and potentially disruptive. The paperwork was filled out accordingly. Patient has no other involved family. Charles, by this point fatigued beyond protest and often sedated for pain, became a prisoner in a medical scenario designed by his jailer. David's final moves were financial. He used the power of attorney to liquidate several of Charles's investment accounts, moving funds into accounts he controlled jointly with Marie, citing medical expense management. He initiated the process of selling the now vacant Whitmore family home, telling the realtor Charles needed the equity to cover end-of-life arrangements. The entire fortune Charles had built, the life he had crafted, was being systematically dismantled and funneled away, all under the legal guise of acting in his best interests. This was the calcified reality when hospice nurse Lauren Gibbs arrived for her first solo visit to the Mercer home. Her job was comfort, dignity, pain management. But her training also included spotting red flags, patient isolation, sudden financial changes, a controlling caregiver limiting access. She saw a man thin and frail but with intelligent eyes that followed her. She saw David, who hovered, answering every question directed at Charles. And she saw the admission file, no known family. But names have a way of sticking. Whitmore. She'd seen it before years ago in a local feature article about community builders. She remembered a photo of a vibrant man cutting a ribbon. That night, driven by a gut feeling she couldn't ignore, she did a simple internet search. Charles Whitmore. The article came up, and in it, a quote from his elder daughter, Alina, praising her father's work ethic, a daughter with a byline at a West Coast newspaper. Lauren sat in her car the next day, outside the Mercer home before her shift, holding her personal phone. This was a breach of protocol. It could cost her job. But the look in Charles's eyes wasn't just sickness, it was a plea. She found Alina Whitmore's contact information through the newspaper. She took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a woman's voice, sharp and professional, answered. Alina Whitmore speaking. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. Miss Whitmore, my name is Lauren. I'm a hospice nurse currently caring for a patient named Charles Whitmore. The paperwork here says he has no other family, but I believe you are his daughter. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, and then it shattered with a single, breathless word. What? Alina Whitmore was on a plane within 4 hours of that call, her mind a storm of rage, guilt, and chilling clarity. Every unanswered call, every blocked visit over the past year suddenly snapped into a horrifying pattern. She landed just after midnight, drove directly to her sister's house, and pounded on the door until a light came on. Marie answered, her face pale with shock. What, how? Where is he, Marie? Alina's voice was stone. Where is Dad? David appeared behind Marie, tying a robe, his expression shifting from sleep to calculated calm. Alina, it's the middle of the night. Your father is in hospice care, as I've told you. He's peaceful. You showing up like this will only upset him. A hospice nurse just called me, Alina said, her eyes locked on David. She said the file claims he has no family. Why does the file say that, David? Marie looked between them, confusion turning to dawning horror. David, what is she talking about? David's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of pure panic before the controls slammed back down. A misunderstanding with an overworked nurse. Charles's condition is very fragile. The doctors and I agreed that limiting stressors was paramount. That includes complicated family dynamics. He put a protective arm around Marie. We are his family. We are following medical advice. Alina knew she wouldn't get the truth here. Not tonight. I want to see him. Tomorrow. You will give me the address and the name of the hospice agency, or my next call is to an attorney and the Adult Protective Services hotline. She turned and left, the slam of her rental car door echoing in the quiet street. The next morning, armed with the information she demanded, Alina walked into the hospice agency's office. She bypassed the front desk and asked to speak to the director of nursing. When a woman named Sharon emerged, Alina presented her driver's license and a copy of her birth certificate. My name is Alina Whitmore. Charles Whitmore is my father. I have been systematically prevented from contacting him for over a year by his son-in-law, David Mercer, who I believe has falsified your records to state he has no other family. I am here to see my father, and I am here to file a formal report of suspected elder abuse and isolation. The bureaucratic machinery, once confronted with a direct, documented challenge, began to turn. Sharon, visibly alarmed, pulled Charles's file. There it was in David's handwriting on the intake form. Patient has one daughter locally, Marie Mercer. No other immediate family. There was no note of an estranged daughter, no documentation of any risk. It was a flat, fraudulent statement. Within an hour, Alina was in a car with a hospice supervisor being driven to the Mercer home. David was waiting, his lawyerly composure in place. He attempted to block the door. "This is a private residence. You cannot just bring people here." The hospice supervisor, a no-nonsense man named Greg, held up a clipboard. "Mr. Mercer, as the listed primary contact for a patient under our care, you agreed to our policies, which include allowing designated family access unless a court order bars it. We have verified Ms. Whitmore's relationship. She will be visiting her father." For the first time, Alina saw real fear in David's eyes. He was losing control of the narrative. She walked past him, down the hall to the converted sunroom that served as her father's hospice suite. The sight stole her breath. Her robust, laughing father was a skeleton under a blanket, an oxygen cannula in his nose. But when his eyes met hers, they widened, then filled with tears. His hand, thin and veined, trembled as it reached for her. She took it, knelt by the bed. "I'm here, Dad. I'm so sorry I'm late." He couldn't speak well, his words slurred by medication and weakness, but he squeezed her hand with a shocking intensity. He kept looking from her to the doorway where David lurked, his expression a silent scream of warning. That visit lasted only 20 minutes before David insisted Charles needed rest, but it was enough. Outside, Alina turned to Greg. "He's terrified of his son-in-law. That is not peace. That is coercion. What is your agency's protocol for reporting suspected financial abuse?" Greg's face was grim. "We are mandatory reporters. I will be filing a report with Adult Protective Services today." Alina's next stop was the law firm of Miller and Cho, specialists in elder law and probate litigation. She sat across from attorney Sarah Cho and laid out the timeline. The power of attorney signed post-surgery, the isolation, the falsified hospice forms, the sudden move of her father from his own home. "I need to know what he's done financially, and I need to stop it," Alina said. Sarah Cho's first move was to draft an urgent petition to the court for a temporary emergency guardianship over Charles, citing the fraud and Alina's status as an interested family member. This would freeze David's power of attorney pending a full hearing. The second was to serve David with a formal notice, demanding an immediate accounting of all financial transactions conducted under the power of attorney. David's response was not panic but a counterattack. Through his own lawyer, he filed an objection to the guardianship, portraying Alina as an estranged, disruptive daughter who had abandoned her father and was now seeking to interfere with his loving, dedicated care in his final days. He included affidavits from the hospice physician, who only knew what David had told him, stating that Charles was at peace and that changes could cause severe distress. The legal battle had begun, a race against the most final deadline of all, Charles's life expectancy, measured in weeks. While the lawyers traded paper, Alina began her own investigation. She went to her father's now-sold house and spoke to the old neighbors. One remembered a for sale sign going up surprisingly fast. Another mentioned seeing David and a realtor but never Charles. She tracked down the realtor, posing as a potential buyer curious about the quick sale. The realtor, unaware of the drama, mentioned offhandedly, "Oh, it was a bit unusual. The seller's son-in-law handled everything. The owner was already in hospice, needed the liquidity, I was told." The sale price was $420,000, far below market value for a quick, quiet sale. Next, she visited Whitmore and Sons Construction. The office manager, a woman named Brenda who'd worked for Charles for 20 years, broke down crying when she saw Alina. "He just vanished," Brenda said. "David started coming in saying your father was too sick to be involved. He changed the bank's signatures, started moving money. He said it was for medical bills, but the amounts, they didn't add up. He laid off the crew 2 months ago, said the business was closing. We tried to call your father, but David said he couldn't be disturbed." Alina got a copy of the final business bank statements. In the 3 months prior to closing, David had wired $150,000 from the company account to an account in the name of Mercer Family Holdings, LLC. The paper trail was starting to glow red hot. But the most damning discovery came from an unexpected source, Marie. She showed up at Aliner's hotel room one evening, her eyes hollow. "I found statements," she whispered, clutching a manila envelope, "in David's office. He told me he was just managing Dad's assets, protecting us, but these are new accounts, investment accounts I've never seen, and a life insurance policy." She handed the papers to Aliner. The life insurance policy was for $500,000. The beneficiary was not Charles's estate. It was David Mercer, with Marie as a contingent beneficiary. It had been taken out 6 months ago, around the time hospice care began. A cold, financial bet on a man's death. Aliner now had the weapons: evidence of asset diversion, a low-ball quick sale of the house, a suspicious life insurance policy, and the sworn testimony of a mandatory reporter from the hospice agency. She brought it all to Sarah Cho. Sarah reviewed the documents, her expression turning deadly serious. This moves it from questionable care into the realm of premeditated financial exploitation. The life insurance policy is particularly egregious. We need to get this in front of a judge immediately. We're going to amend our petition to include a demand for a forensic accountant and a request for the court to freeze all of David and Marie's joint assets. The amended petition was filed. The legal stakes had just skyrocketed from a family dispute to allegations of felony-level fraud and exploitation. The hearing for the temporary guardianship was set for Friday. David would be served not just with legal papers, but with the terrifying realization that his meticulously built house of cards was cracking. On Thursday night, the night before the hearing, Aliner received a call from the hospice nurse, Lauren. Her voice was tense, scared. "I just left my shift. David cornered me in the driveway. He didn't yell. He just said very quietly, 'You've chosen a side. I hope you've considered the professional consequences and the personal ones.' It was a threat, Aliner. He knows I reported him." Then Lauren delivered the second, far worse piece of news. "There's something else. When I was checking on your father tonight, his medication schedule had been changed. The doctor's order pad was on the counter. David had called in a new prescription for a much stronger sedative. The reason listed was terminal agitation. But your father wasn't agitated today. He was lucid. He was trying to whisper to me." Aliner's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Lauren whispered, "that with a heavily sedated patient who can't communicate, it becomes very easy to justify anything. And if the sedation is deep enough, it might just hasten the very event that pays out that life insurance policy before a judge can stop it. You need to get over there. Now." Aliner didn't hang up the phone. She ran. Grabbing her car keys, she called her lawyer, Sarah Cho, on speaker as she sped through the dark streets. "He's changing the meds, Sarah. The nurse says he's trying to sedate him into silence before the hearing. What do I do?" Sarah's voice was razor-sharp. "Get to the house. Do not leave your father's side. I'm calling the hospice's after-hours line right now to report a potential violation of care and demanding an immediate review by the medical director. I'm also drafting an emergency motion for the court, right now, for a temporary restraining order barring David from making any medical decisions and appointing you as temporary medical proxy. We'll file it first thing in the morning, but you need to be his shield tonight." When Aliner arrived, the house was dark except for the light in her father's room. She didn't knock. She tried the front door, locked. She moved to the side gate, finding it latched but not padlocked. Slipping into the backyard, she approached the sunroom window. Through the blinds, she saw David standing by the bed, holding a small paper cup and a medication dropper. Her father's head was turned away, weakly resisting. Aliner didn't think. She pounded on the glass patio door. David jumped, the cup falling from his hand, liquid spilling on the floor. His face, when he saw her, was pure, undiluted fury. He stalked over and unlocked the door. "Get off my property. You are trespassing." "I am my father's daughter and I am staying right here," Alina said, pushing past him to Charles's bedside. She took his hand. His eyes found hers, swimming with fear and relief. "It's okay, Dad, I'm here. No one is giving you anything you don't want." David pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," Alina said, not looking away from her father. "Tell them you're calling on the man whose life insurance policy you're trying to collect, who you've isolated and whose assets you've stolen. I'm sure they'll be very interested." David froze, the phone in his hand. The revelation about the life insurance policy, which he didn't know Marie had discovered, was a direct hit. The calculation in his eyes was visible, the risk of police involvement now, with Alina as a witness versus waiting for the legal battle. He lowered the phone. "You have no proof of anything. You're destroying this family with your hysterical accusations." "The only thing being destroyed," Alina said quietly, "is your plan." For the next 6 hours, Alina sat vigil. David paced the house, making hushed, angry phone calls in another room. Marie never appeared. Around 4 in the morning, Alina's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Cho. "Emergency TRO filed electronically with the night judge. Hearing on it is consolidated with the guardianship hearing at 9 a.m. Be at the courthouse. A process server will meet David there. Do not let your father out of your sight until then." The sun rose on the day of the hearing. At 7 a.m., a hospice supervisor arrived with a new nurse, a large, calm man named Leo, sent by the agency after Sarah's furious call to the medical director. The supervisor informed David that, due to the allegations, all medication administration would be handled solely by hospice staff until further notice, and a family member, Alina, would be present for all care. David was boxed out of his primary tool of control, Charles's medical access. The ride to the courthouse was a silent, tense caravan. Alina rode with Charles in the hospice transport van, holding his hand. David and Marie followed in their car with David's lawyer. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating space. Charles, in a wheelchair, looked heartbreakingly small. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, had clearly read the filings. She listened as Sarah Cho outlined the case: the fraudulent isolation, the diverted assets, the suspicious life insurance policy, and the urgent medical intervention the night before. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of predatory exploitation. We are asking for an emergency temporary guardianship over Mr. Whitmore's person and estate, the freezing of all accounts controlled by Mr. Mercer, and the immediate invalidation of the power of attorney obtained under dubious circumstances." David's lawyer argued back, painting Alina as an opportunistic absentee and David as a devoted caregiver burdened by a difficult family situation. He dismissed the life insurance as estate planning and the asset moves as bill payments. Then the judge did something unexpected. She looked at Charles. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice softer, "can you understand what we are discussing here?" All eyes turned to him. He was frail, but his gaze was clear. He looked at Alina, then at David, who stared back with a fixed, warning expression. Charles's mouth worked. He lifted a trembling finger, pointing first at David, then making a sharp, cutting motion across his own throat. He then pointed at Alina and gave a slow, definitive nod. The gesture was more powerful than any testimony. The judge's expression hardened. She granted the temporary guardianship to Alina on the spot, froze all accounts linked to David's power of attorney, and appointed a neutral forensic accountant to trace every dollar. She also signed the restraining order, barring David from any medical decision-making or unsupervised contact with Charles. David left the courtroom white-faced. He had lost control, and the financial tap had been shut off. But back at the house, a new problem emerged. With the restraining order in place, David and Marie demanded that Alina and the hospice staff leave their home. The legal victory had created a physical crisis. Charles had nowhere to go. He couldn't return to his sold house. The hospice agency scrambled, but placing a fragile, high-needs patient on an emergency basis was nearly impossible. Then the forensic accountant's preliminary report landed, and the situation went from bad to catastrophic. It wasn't just the stolen business funds and the house sale money. David, in the months leading up to hospice, had taken out 3 massive lines of credit against Charles's remaining assets, a total of $200,000, and funneled the cash into the Mercer Family Holdings LLC. That LLC, the accountant discovered, was hemorrhaging money. David had used Charles's stolen wealth to cover bad personal investments and a staggering amount of gambling debt. The exploitation wasn't just greedy, it was desperate. David wasn't just stealing an inheritance. He was using Charles's assets as a life raft for his own drowning finances. And with those accounts now frozen, David's creditors were starting to circle. This desperation birthed a new, unthinkable strategy. David's lawyer contacted Sarah Cho with a settlement offer. The terms: a lien would drop the guardianship and all legal claims. In return, David would not fight her visiting Charles. The hidden clause: they would move Charles to a different hospice facility, one where David could reestablish control over the paperwork. They were offering Alina access in exchange for handing her father back to the wolf. Sarah read the offer aloud to Alina over the phone. "It's a trap. They want you to voluntarily dissolve the only legal protection you have. They're panicking." Alina felt sick. "What do we do? He can't stay here, and we can't move him to some facility they choose." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "There's one option. It's extreme, and it will be a public nuclear war. We go on the offensive. We take the forensic report, the life insurance policy, the testimony from the hospice nurse, and we take it all to the district attorney's office. We push for criminal charges: theft, fraud, attempted elder abuse. We make this so public and so legally dangerous for David that his only move is to surrender completely." It meant dragging her sister's husband into a criminal courtroom. It meant the story would be in the news. It meant the final weeks of her father's life would be defined by a scorched-earth legal battle. Alina looked at her father, sleeping fitfully in the borrowed hospital bed in a stranger's living room, a temporary solution from a hospice social worker. She thought of the fear in his eyes when David held that medication dropper. She thought of the desperate cut of his hand across his throat in the courtroom. He had been fighting a silent, trapped battle for his life long before she arrived. It was time to fight it out loud. "Do it," Alina said, her voice hollow but certain. "File the criminal complaint. Take it to the DA." The decision triggered the final, desperate escalation. Because David Mercer, cornered and facing not just financial ruin but prison, had one last, vicious card to play. He didn't go after Alina or the lawyers. He went after the one person who had started it all, the whistleblower, the hospice nurse, Lauren Gibbs. Lauren Gibbs received the formal termination letter from the hospice agency 2 days later. The stated reason was a violation of patient confidentiality and professional boundaries. David Mercer had filed a detailed complaint, complete with falsified log notes suggesting Lauren had administered medication without consent. It was a textbook retaliation, designed to destroy her credibility and career. But Lauren, instead of crumbling, called Sarah Cho. "I want to add a charge of witness intimidation to your criminal complaint," she said, "and I have documentation of everything." While David was focused on silencing a nurse, the district attorney's office had opened a formal criminal investigation. The forensic accountant's report was a roadmap of theft. The life insurance policy was evidence of intent. Adult Protective Services submitted their findings, confirming isolation and exploitation. And now, they had a witness being actively persecuted for coming forward. The pressure became unbearable for David's financial house of cards. With the lines of credit frozen and his own accounts under scrutiny, his creditors began calling in their loans. The Mercer Family Holdings LLC was forced into bankruptcy. In a desperate bid for leniency, David's own lawyer advised him to start talking to the DA about a plea deal. But the most devastating blow came from within his own home. Marie, after weeks of silent turmoil, walked into the district attorney's office with her own statement. She detailed David's gradual takeover, his lies about Alina, his pressure to sign documents she didn't understand. She surrendered all the financial records she had hidden from him. Her testimony was the final piece that transformed the case from a circumstantial financial dispute into a provable pattern of domestic coercion and fraud. With criminal indictment now imminent, David's civil lawyer contacted Sarah Cho with a true, non-negotiable surrender. David would voluntarily and permanently relinquish all claims to guardianship or power of attorney. He would sign over any remaining assets held in the LLC back to Charles's estate. He would not contest the invalidation of the life insurance policy. In return, Alina would not object to a plea deal on the criminal side that might keep him out of prison, and would drop her civil suit for asset recovery. Alina, with Charles's frail hand in hers, made the decision. The goal was never to destroy him. The goal was to save my father. If his surrender gives my father peace, then we take it. The legal war ended not with a dramatic trial, but with a stack of quiet, binding paperwork that stripped David Mercer of every ounce of power he had stolen. With the legal siege lifted, Alina could focus on what mattered, her father's final days. She moved him to a serene, nonprofit hospice residence with a view of a garden. He was lucid for periods, free from the heavy sedation David had demanded. In one of those clear moments, he looked at Alina and whispered, "You came back." She wept, holding him. "I will never leave you again," she promised. He passed away 1 week later peacefully, with Alina reading to him. He was buried next to his wife, Helen. The obituary listed Alina as his cherished daughter. It made no mention of Marie or David. The aftermath was a complex tapestry of ruin and rebuilding. David Mercer pleaded guilty to felony financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, mandatory financial restitution, and 200 hours of community service in a senior center. His financial planning license was permanently revoked. He and Marie divorced. Marie, ostracized and burdened with guilt, moved to another state. The relationship between the sisters remained shattered, a casualty of the betrayal that Alina could not and did not wish to repair. Lauren Gibbs, with the full support of Sarah Cho and the DA's office, sued the hospice agency for wrongful termination and retaliation. The case settled quickly, with Lauren receiving a significant settlement, a formal letter of apology, and the agency overhauling its whistleblower protection policies. She continues to work as a hospice nurse, now a passionate advocate for mandatory reporter training. Charles Whitmore's estate, though depleted, was secured. The sale of the business assets and the recovery of some funds from the LLC left a modest inheritance. In his will, revised years before David entered the picture, he left everything in trust for his grandchildren, should Alina ever have children. In a codicil added during his final week, he left a separate, heartfelt gift, a sum of $25,000 to Lauren Gibbs, for her courage and compassion, which gave me back my voice and my daughter. Alina sold the last of her father's assets, closed the chapter on her hometown, and returned to her life on the West Coast. She carries the grief, but not the guilt. She knows she arrived in time to fight the battle he could not, and to hold his hand at the end. The system in this case worked, but only because one nurse chose to see a patient as a person, not just a file. Because a daughter refused to be gaslit. Because a lawyer fought with ferocity. And because a dying man in a final gesture in a courtroom told the truth without saying a word. The story of Charles Whitmore is a stark map of how easily a life can be hollowed out from the inside, disguised as care. It shows that the greatest predators often operate not in shadows, but in living rooms and hospital rooms, wielding paperwork and plausible lies. But it also shows that isolation, the abuser's primary weapon, is also their greatest vulnerability. It only takes one thread pulled by one courageous person to unravel the entire tapestry of control. Charles Whitmore's story has an ending, but the silence it emerged from does not. It is estimated that for every case of elder abuse or exploitation that is reported, as many as 23 others go unseen. The victims are often people who built lives of substance and connection, only to have those very things, their assets, their homes, their family ties, weaponized against them at their most vulnerable moment. This exploitation thrives in the gaps between medical systems and legal protections, between family assumptions and harsh realities, and most of all in the quiet isolation that a manipulator can construct with nothing more than a phone call, a lie on a form, and a presumptive tone of authority. It is a crime that doesn't look like a crime. It looks like caring. It sounds like concern. It is documented as procedure. What broke the cycle here was not a superhero, but a series of small, courageous choices. A nurse who saw a person, not just a patient. A daughter who trusted her gut over gaslighting. A legal system that, when presented with evidence, acted. It is a blueprint for intervention, but also a warning. The greatest defense against this darkness is not suspicion, but connection. Checking in, showing up, asking the second question when the first answer doesn't feel right. If this story resonates with you, it is likely because you have seen a fragment of this pattern somewhere in your own world. A neighbor who suddenly disappears, a relative whose calls are always intercepted, an elder whose finances are suddenly being helped by a new, overly involved person. Trust that feeling. Be the thread that pulls. Your attention could be the only lifeline someone has left. Thank you for listening to this documentary. If you found it compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into stories of justice, resilience, and the systems that shape our lives. We would love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a situation that made you question what was really going on behind closed doors? To listen to the next story, click on the box on your screen. Remember, the world is made of stories waiting to be heard. Sometimes, listening is the first act of saving someone.